Have you ever been in a situation where your worst nightmare just walked through the door and there was absolutely nowhere to run? Where every exit suddenly felt impossible and your body just froze, even though your mind was screaming at you to move? I want to know where you're from because I feel like we all have that moment where we realize how trapped we really are, and I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Isabella Romano was wiping down table 12 for the third time when she saw him. Her hand stopped moving across the red checkered tablecloth, the damp rag still clutched in her fingers as every muscle in her body went rigid. Tyler Brennan stood in the doorway of Nana's Italian restaurant, his eyes scanning the dining room with that familiar predatory focus that had haunted her dreams for 6 months. No, not here. Not now. She'd been so careful. Changed her phone number, quit her job at the coffee shop downtown, moved to a studio apartment in Little Italy that she could barely afford. 6 months of looking over her shoulder, 6 months of jumping at sudden noises, 6 months of slowly, carefully rebuilding a life that Tyler had systematically destroyed. And now he was here, in the one place she'd finally started to feel safe. The dinner rush was in full swing around her, the restaurant buzzing with conversation and the clatter of silverware against plates. The warm lighting cast everything in a golden glow, families and couples enjoying their evening meals completely unaware that Isabella's world had just tilted off its axis. She could smell the garlic and basil from the kitchen, could hear Mrs. Benedetto laughing at something her husband said at table 6, could see steam rising from the fresh bread basket she'd delivered to table 4 just minutes ago. Everything was exactly as it should be, except for the man in the doorway who had made her life hell for 2 years. Tyler spotted her then, his face lighting up with that smile that had once made her feel special and now made her feel sick. He was dressed in the same style she remembered, dark jeans and a fitted button-down shirt that showed off the physique he was so proud of. Still handsome in that clean-cut way that had initially attracted her, still carrying himself with the confidence that had gradually transformed into control and then into something much darker. At 28, he looked successful and charming, the kind of man other people would describe as a catch. They had no idea what he was really like behind closed doors. He started walking toward her, weaving between tables with that easy stride she knew so well. Isabella's heart was hammering against her ribs so hard she was sure everyone in the restaurant could hear it. Her breathing became shallow, quick little gasps that weren't bringing in enough air. The rag fell from her nerveless fingers to land on the floor with a soft thud that seemed impossibly loud in her ears. Run, her mind screamed at her. Run now. Get to the kitchen. Get to the back exit. Get anywhere but here. But her feet might as well have been cemented to the floor. This was what Tyler did to her, what he'd always done. Made her freeze when she needed to move. Made her silent when she needed to scream. Made her small when she needed to be strong. Table 12 was in the back corner of the restaurant, near the kitchen but still clearly visible from the front entrance. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to go that he couldn't follow. The other servers were busy with their own tables, and even if they noticed something was wrong, what could they do? Tyler was good at playing the part of the concerned ex-boyfriend, the guy who just wanted to talk, to work things out. He'd never shown his true face in public. He was halfway across the dining room now, and Isabella could see the determination in his eyes, that familiar look that said he'd decided something and nothing was going to change his mind. She knew that look. She'd seen it the night she'd finally worked up the courage to leave, when he'd blocked her path to the door and told her she wasn't going anywhere, ever. She'd seen it when he'd shown up at her old job 3 months ago, forcing her to quit and find something else. She'd seen it in her nightmares every single night since. You're safe here, she told herself desperately. There are people around. He can't do anything with witnesses. But even as she thought it, she knew it wasn't true. Tyler was smart about these things. He'd wait until she was alone, follow her home, corner her in the alley behind the restaurant. He'd found her once, which meant he'd been watching, learning her schedule, her routines. The thought made her stomach lurch with a fear so intense it was almost physically painful. The restaurant suddenly felt too small, too warm, too bright. The conversations around her became a buzzing white noise that couldn't quite drown out the sound of Tyler's footsteps on the tile floor. She was dimly aware that she was shaking, tiny tremors running through her whole body that she couldn't control. Her palms were sweating, and she wiped them on her black apron, The same nervous gesture she developed during those final months with Tyler when everything she did seemed to set him off. He was at table 11 now, just one table away, close enough that she could see the familiar scar on his left hand from when he'd punched a wall during one of his rages. Close enough to smell his cologne, that expensive stuff he wore that she used to love and now associated with fear and pain. Close enough that when he spoke, his voice would carry clearly over the ambient noise of the restaurant. "Hello, Izzy," Tyler said, using the nickname she'd once loved and now hated. His voice was warm, friendly, the tone he used when he was performing for an audience. "You look good. I've missed you." Isabella's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She stared at him. This man who had systematically destroyed her confidence, her independence, her sense of safety in the world. He looked exactly the same. Not a hair out of place, not a sign that the past 6 months had affected him at all. While she'd been struggling to pay rent, jumping at shadows, rebuilding her life one terrifying day at a time, he'd apparently been just fine. "We need to talk," Tyler continued when she didn't respond. "It's been long enough, don't you think? All this nonsense has gone on too long. You've made your point, but it's time to come home now." The casual dismissal of everything she'd been through, the complete lack of recognition that she'd left for good reasons, that she had a right to be free of him, hit her like a physical blow. This was Tyler's version of reality, where her leaving had been a tantrum, a phase, something temporary that he could wait out and then correct. She became aware that other diners were starting to notice the interaction. An elderly couple at table 9 kept glancing over, their conversation trailing off as they sensed the tension. The family at table 7, parents with 2 young children, had stopped talking entirely and were watching with obvious discomfort. Even the servers seemed to sense that something was wrong, though they continued moving between tables with the practiced efficiency that came from years of experience. "I don't want to talk to you," Isabella finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please just leave." Tyler's smile didn't waver, but something shifted behind his eyes, that flash of anger she knew so well. "Come on, Izzy, don't be like this. You know I'm not giving up that easily. You belong with me, and we both know it. This little experiment of yours is over." He reached out as if to touch her arm, and Isabella jerked backward so violently that she knocked into the chair behind her. The sharp scraping noise it made against the floor seemed to echo through the suddenly quiet section of the restaurant. Several people were openly staring now, though Tyler seemed oblivious to the attention or simply didn't care. "Don't touch me," Isabella said, louder this time, though her voice still shook. "I mean it, Tyler. Leave me alone." That's when she noticed him. The man at the corner table, the one who came in every few weeks and always ordered the same thing. Osso buco, a glass of chianti, and tiramisu for dessert. He was maybe in his mid-30s, with dark hair and the kind of face that suggested Italian heritage, all sharp angles and strong features. She'd served him before and had always been struck by how polite he was, how he thanked her by name and left generous tips. But she'd also noticed something else about him, something in the way other people reacted to his presence, the way conversations quieted slightly when he walked by, the way even the kitchen staff seemed more deferential when preparing his meals. He was watching Tyler with an expression Isabella had never seen before, cold and calculating in a way that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. There was something dangerous about him in that moment, something that suggested Tyler had just made a very serious mistake by bringing his drama into this particular restaurant. The man set down his wine glass with deliberate precision and stood up. He wasn't particularly tall, maybe 6 feet, but he moved with a confidence that commanded attention. His suit was clearly expensive, perfectly tailored, the kind of clothing that spoke of real money and real power. As he walked toward them, Isabella noticed that other diners seemed to instinctively make way for him, though whether they were conscious of it or not was unclear. "Is there a problem here?" the man asked, his voice quiet but carrying easily in the suddenly hushed restaurant. He had a slight accent, Italian but educated, cultured in a way that suggested he was equally comfortable in boardrooms and on the street. Tyler turned to face him, irritation flashing across his features. "This is a private conversation," he said sharply. "It doesn't concern you." The man smiled, but it wasn't a warm expression. It was the kind of smile that suggested Tyler had just said something amusing and stupid at the same time. I'm afraid it does concern me when one of our valued employees is being harassed during her shift. This is a family establishment, and we prefer our guests to conduct themselves accordingly. There was something in the way he said family establishment that carried extra weight, some meaning that Tyler clearly didn't understand, but that made several nearby diners exchange glances. Isabella felt a strange mixture of relief and new fear. Someone was standing up for her, but she had the distinct feeling that this man was every bit as dangerous as Tyler, just in a completely different way. "Look, I don't know who you think you are," Tyler started, his voice rising slightly, "but I'm just trying to talk to my girlfriend." "Ex-girlfriend," Isabella said quickly, finding her voice again. She looked at the dark-haired man, not sure if she should be grateful or terrified. "We're not together anymore. I've told him to leave me alone, but he won't listen." The man's attention shifted to Tyler, and his expression didn't change, but somehow the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "I think the lady has made herself clear," he said softly. "Perhaps it would be best if you left now." Tyler puffed up slightly, clearly offended by the suggestion that anyone could tell him what to do. "And perhaps it would be best if you minded your own business. Izzy and I have history, and we're going to work this out whether you like it or not." That was the wrong thing to say. Isabella could see it in the way the man's shoulders shifted almost imperceptibly, in the way his hands, which had been relaxed at his sides, moved to adjust his cufflinks in what looked like a casual gesture but felt like a threat. The whole restaurant seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. "Let me be very clear," the man said, his voice still quiet, but now carrying an edge that made Isabella's skin prickle with awareness. "The lady asked you to leave. I'm asking you to leave. You don't want me to have to ask a third time." There was something about the way he said it, some implicit threat that Tyler either didn't recognize or chose to ignore. Instead, he stepped closer to Isabella, his frustration finally showing through his carefully maintained facade. "You're making a mistake, Izzy," Tyler said, his voice dropping to that low, intimate tone that had once made her feel special and now made her feel sick. "You know what I'm capable of. You know what happens when you make me angry. Come with me now, and we can pretend this never happened." The threat was clear enough that several nearby diners gasped audibly. The elderly woman at table 9 reached for her husband's hand, her face pale with concern. But the dark-haired man just nodded slightly, as if Tyler had confirmed something he'd suspected. "That's enough," the man said, and suddenly he was between Tyler and Isabella, moving with a fluid grace that spoke of training and experience. His presence created a barrier that felt both protective and lethal. "Tyler, wait outside. I'll take care of this." The words hit Isabella like a physical blow, so similar to what Tyler had just said, but carrying an entirely different meaning. Tyler had meant it as a threat to her, but this man was clearly threatening Tyler. And from the way Tyler's face went pale, he finally understood exactly what kind of situation he'd walked into. "You don't know who you're messing with," Tyler said, but his voice lacked conviction now. He was backing away slightly, some survival instinct finally kicking in despite his anger. "Actually," the man replied with that cold smile, "I think you're the one who doesn't know who they're messing with. This is your last opportunity to leave under your own power. I'd recommend taking it." The threat was unmistakable now, and even Tyler wasn't foolish enough to miss it. He looked around the restaurant, seeming to notice for the first time that every conversation had stopped, that every eye was on him, that the atmosphere had shifted from uncomfortable to genuinely dangerous. Whatever he saw in the faces watching him made him take another step back. "This isn't over, Izzy," Tyler said, but the bluster was gone from his voice. He was speaking to Isabella, but looking at the man who stood between them. "You know where to find me when you come to your senses." He turned and walked toward the exit, his movements sharp with suppressed anger and bruised pride. The man didn't move until Tyler had pushed through the front door and disappeared into the night, and only then did he turn back to Isabella. "Are you all right?" he asked, and his voice was completely different now, gentle and concerned instead of coldly threatening. Isabella realized she was still shaking, adrenaline coursing through her system, making it hard to think clearly. She nodded, then shook her head, then nodded again, not sure what she was trying to communicate. "Why don't you take a break?" the man suggested. "Go to the back, get some water, take a few minutes to collect yourself." "I can't," Isabella said automatically. "I'm working. I have tables." The man looked around the restaurant. where conversations were slowly resuming and the normal dinner atmosphere was gradually returning. Your tables will be fine. Go take care of yourself. That's more important right now. There was something about the way he said it, some authority that made it clear this wasn't really a suggestion. Isabella nodded and walked toward the kitchen on unsteady legs, conscious that he was watching her go with those dark, unreadable eyes. Isabella stood in the kitchen for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes, her hands wrapped around a glass of water that Rosa the cook had pressed into her trembling fingers. The familiar sounds of the dinner rush continued around her, servers calling out orders, the sizzle of pans on the stove, the steady rhythm of chopping and stirring that usually comforted her. Tonight it all felt distant, like she was hearing it through a thick wall of cotton. Her mind kept replaying the confrontation, the way Tyler had looked at her with that possessive certainty, as if the past 6 months of freedom had been nothing more than a temporary inconvenience. But worse than that was the memory of the dark-haired man stepping between them, the cold authority in his voice when he'd told Tyler to leave. There had been something in that moment that felt both protective and dangerous, like standing in the eye of a hurricane. The kitchen door swung open and Maria, the head server, poked her head in. "The gentleman at table 15 would like to speak with you when you're ready," she said gently. "No rush, honey. You take all the time you need." Table 15. The corner table where the mysterious man had been sitting. Isabella's stomach clenched with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. She knew she needed to thank him, but she also knew that accepting help from someone like him might come with complications she wasn't prepared for. She smoothed down her apron and walked back into the dining room on legs that still felt unsteady. The restaurant had returned to its normal atmosphere, conversations flowing around tables filled with families and couples enjoying their evening meals. It was hard to believe that 20 minutes ago her entire world had been turned upside down. The man was sitting exactly where she'd left him, his wine glass refilled and his meal apparently untouched. He looked up as she approached, and she was struck again by how different he seemed from Tyler. Where Tyler was all aggressive energy and demanding presence, this man possessed a quiet confidence that didn't need to announce itself. His dark eyes studied her face with concern that seemed genuine. "How are you feeling?" he asked as she stopped beside his table. "Better," Isabella said, though she wasn't sure that was entirely true. "Thank you for what you did. You didn't have to get involved." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Please sit. We should talk." Isabella hesitated, glancing around the dining room. She was still technically working, still had tables to check on, side work to finish before her shift ended. But something in his manner suggested this wasn't really a request, and after what he'd done for her, refusing seemed both ungrateful and unwise. She sat down carefully, her hands folded in her lap. Up close, she could see details she'd missed before. The expensive watch on his wrist, the way his suit jacket hung perfectly across his shoulders, the small scar that ran along his left temple. He looked like money, but not the flashy kind. This was old money, established power, the kind that didn't need to show off because everyone already knew what it represented. "My name is Dante Castellano," he said, extending his hand across the table. "Isabella Romano," she replied, shaking his hand briefly. His grip was firm but gentle, and she noticed the calluses on his palms that suggested his wealth hadn't made him soft. "Isabella," he repeated, as if testing how her name sounded. "That man who was bothering you. Tyler. Tell me about him." The question was direct but not demanding, and somehow Isabella found herself wanting to answer honestly. Maybe it was the relief of finally having someone take her seriously, or maybe it was something in Dante's manner that suggested he genuinely wanted to help. Either way, the words came easier than they had in months. "We dated for 2 years," she said quietly. "Lived together for most of that time. He was controlling, possessive. It started small, you know? Comments about my clothes, my friends, where I went when I wasn't with him. Then it got worse. He'd check my phone, follow me to work, show up places I was supposed to be alone. When I tried to leave the first time, he convinced me I was overreacting, that he just loved me so much it made him crazy." Dante listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail she shared. There was something in his eyes that reminded her of the moment he'd confronted Tyler, a cold anger that was all the more frightening for how controlled it was. "The second time I tried to leave, he wouldn't let me," Isabella continued. "Blocked the door, took my car keys, told me I belonged to him and he'd never let me go. He didn't hit me that night, but he made it clear that he could, that he would, if I kept pushing him. And now? Dante asked quietly. Now he's found me again, Isabella said, and she couldn't keep the despair out of her voice. I changed my number, moved, got a new job. I've been so careful for 6 months, and it didn't matter. He found me anyway. Dante was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming silently against the white tablecloth. When he spoke again, his voice was measured, thoughtful. Men like Tyler don't give up easily. What happened tonight? You standing up to him in public, having someone else intervene on your behalf. That's going to make him angry. Angrier than you've probably seen him before. The words hit Isabella like ice water, confirming her worst fears. She'd known, even as relief flooded through her when Tyler left, that this wasn't over. If anything, tonight had probably made everything worse. I know, she whispered. I just don't know what to do anymore. I can't keep running forever. You don't have to run, Dante said simply. But you do need protection. Real protection, not just a restraining order that he'll ignore or a security system he can work around. Isabella looked up at him, confused. What kind of protection? The kind I can provide. The words hung between them, loaded with implications that Isabella wasn't sure she understood. She studied his face, looking for some clue about what he was really offering, what it might cost her. I don't understand, she said carefully. Tyler will be back, Dante explained patiently. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. He'll have learned from tonight's encounter, and next time he'll be more careful about when and where he approaches you. He'll wait until you're alone, vulnerable. And when that happens, you'll need someone who can handle him permanently. The emphasis on the word permanently made Isabella's blood run cold. She wasn't naive. She understood what kind of man Tyler was, what he was capable of. But she was beginning to suspect that Dante was capable of much worse, and the thought of being caught between them terrified her. What exactly are you suggesting? She asked. I'm suggesting you stay somewhere safe while this situation is resolved, Dante said. Somewhere Tyler can't find you, can't hurt you. I have resources, connections. I can make sure you're protected. Isabella shook her head automatically. I appreciate the offer, but I can't accept that. I don't even know you. And I don't want to owe anyone anything, especially someone who. Someone who what? Dante asked when she trailed off. Someone who clearly isn't just a regular customer, Isabella finished quietly. Dante smiled slightly, and for the first time since she'd met him, the expression looked genuinely amused rather than coldly threatening. You're observant. You're right. I'm not just a regular customer. I run a security consulting business with my family. We specialize in protecting people who find themselves in situations that conventional law enforcement can't handle effectively. It was a careful explanation, probably technically true, but clearly leaving out significant details. Isabella had lived in Little Italy long enough to understand the euphemisms, the careful language that people used when they didn't want to spell out exactly what kind of business they were really in. Family business, security consulting, situations that law enforcement couldn't handle. She wasn't stupid. You're talking about organized crime, she said bluntly. I'm talking about protection, Dante corrected. What you choose to call it is up to you. Isabella stared at him, her mind racing. 6 months ago, the idea of accepting help from someone connected to organized crime would have been unthinkable. But 6 months ago, she'd also thought the police could help her, that a restraining order would keep her safe, that if she just tried hard enough she could disappear completely and start over somewhere Tyler couldn't find her. 6 months of reality had taught her that sometimes conventional solutions weren't enough. I can't pay you, she said finally. Whatever this costs, I don't have it. I can barely afford my rent as it is. I'm not asking for money, Dante said quietly. I'm offering help because you need it and because I can provide it. Nothing more complicated than that. Isabella wanted to believe him, but she'd learned to be suspicious of men who offered things that seemed too good to be true. There's always a cost, she said. There's always something you want in return. Right now, the only thing I want is for you to be safe, Dante said, and something in his tone made her believe him. Later, if you decide you want to find a way to repay the favor, we can discuss it then. But right now, your immediate safety is what matters. Isabella looked around the restaurant, at the normal people living their normal lives, completely unaware of the conversation happening at table 15. She thought about her tiny studio apartment with its flimsy locks, about Tyler's threat that this wasn't over, about the sick certainty in her stomach that he wouldn't give up until he destroyed any chance she had at freedom. Where would I stay? She asked quietly. I have a safe house, Dante said. Actually, it's my penthouse, but it's secure. Full-time security, controlled access. No way for Tyler to get close to you there. The offer hung between them, and Isabella felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Accept help from a stranger who was clearly dangerous himself, or go home to her apartment and hope that Tyler would give up. That tonight had been enough to convince him to leave her alone. She knew which choice was smarter, but it still terrified her. This is just temporary? She asked. Until the situation with Tyler is resolved? Temporary, Dante confirmed. You can leave whenever you want. You're not a prisoner, Isabella. You're a guest who needs protection. Isabella closed her eyes, trying to think clearly past the fear and exhaustion. When she opened them again, Dante was watching her with patient concern, not pushing, not demanding, just waiting for her to make her decision. Okay, she said quietly. Thank you. I'll accept your help. Dante nodded and reached into his jacket, pulling out a phone. He dialed a number and spoke quickly in what sounded like Italian, his voice too low for her to catch the words. When he hung up, he looked at her with something that might have been approval. My driver will be here in 10 minutes, he said. Do you have anything at your apartment that you need tonight? Isabella thought about her few possessions, the small pile of belongings that represented her entire independent life. Just some clothes. My work uniform for tomorrow. We'll pick them up on the way, Dante said. Is there anyone you need to call? Anyone who will worry if you don't come home? The question reminded her of how alone she really was. Tyler had systematically isolated her from her friends, and her family lived 3 states away. Her absence wouldn't be noticed by anyone except her landlord when the rent came due. No, she said. There's no one. Something flickered across Dante's face at that, an expression she couldn't quite read. Then he stood and placed several bills on the table, far more than his meal could have possibly cost. Ready? He asked, offering her his arm. Isabella stood on unsteady legs and took his arm, surprised by how solid and reassuring his presence felt. As they walked toward the front of the restaurant, she caught sight of herself in the mirror behind the hostess station. She looked pale and shaken, but for the first time in 6 months, she also looked like someone who had a chance. The ride to her apartment was quiet, conducted in a sleek black car that probably cost more than she made in a year. Dante sat beside her in comfortable silence while she directed his driver through the narrow streets of her neighborhood. When they reached her building, he insisted on coming up with her, his presence both protective and somehow ominous in the narrow hallway outside her door. Her apartment looked smaller and shabbier than ever with him standing in it. The single room that served as bedroom, living room, and office, the kitchenette with its ancient appliances, the bathroom with the door that didn't quite close properly. This was what independence had cost her, this tiny space that Tyler had probably dismissed as pathetic when he'd tracked her down. Isabella packed quickly, throwing clothes and toiletries into a duffel bag while Dante waited by the door. She could feel him taking in the details of her life, the second-hand furniture and bare walls that spoke of someone who'd left everything behind and was still trying to build something new. Ready, she said, shouldering the bag. The penthouse was everything she'd expected and nothing she was prepared for. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, expensive furniture arranged in spaces larger than her entire apartment. Everything was elegant and modern, the kind of home she'd only seen in magazines. But it was also warm, lived in, with personal touches that made it clear this wasn't just a showplace, but an actual home. An elderly woman appeared as soon as they entered, small and neat with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She looked at Isabella with immediate maternal concern, taking in her pale face and clutched duffel bag. Rosa, Dante said, this is Isabella. She'll be staying with us for a while. Of course, Rosa said warmly, her slight Italian accent making the words sound like a melody. Welcome, Cara. You look like you could use some tea and something to eat. Thank you, Isabella managed, overwhelmed by the kindness in the woman's eyes. Rosa will take care of you, Dante said, his voice gentle. Your room is upstairs, second door on the right. Take tonight to rest, and we'll talk more tomorrow about next steps. Isabella nodded, suddenly exhausted beyond words. The adrenaline of the evening was wearing off, leaving her drained and shaky. Rosa guided her toward the stairs with gentle efficiency, chattering softly about bath water and warm milk and fresh linens. As Isabella climbed the stairs, she looked back to see Dante standing in his living room, phone already at his ear, speaking in that quick Italian she'd heard at the restaurant. Even in his own home, surrounded by luxury and safety, he looked like a man with serious business to attend to. The kind of business that involved men like Tyler disappearing permanently. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, for the first time in 6 months, Isabella fell asleep feeling completely safe. Isabella woke to sunlight streaming through windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar luxury surrounding her. The bed was larger than her entire bathroom back at the studio apartment, with sheets that felt like silk against her skin. For a moment she lay still, listening to the sounds of the city far below, and trying to process the surreal turn her life had taken in less than 24 hours. The smell of coffee and something delicious drifted up from downstairs, along with the quiet sounds of conversation in what she was beginning to recognize as Italian. Her stomach rumbled, reminding her that she'd barely eaten anything the night before, too nervous and overwhelmed to manage more than a few bites of the sandwich Rosa had insisted on making for her. She showered in a bathroom that was larger than most people's bedrooms, using expensive toiletries that made her feel like she was staying at a 5-star hotel. The clothes she'd hastily packed looked shabby in such elegant surroundings, but they were clean and they were hers, which felt important somehow in a place where everything else belonged to someone who was still essentially a stranger. Downstairs, she found Dante and Rosa in the kitchen, a massive space with professional-grade appliances and marble countertops that reflected the morning light. Dante was dressed more casually than she'd seen him before, dark slacks and a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, but he still managed to look polished and in control. He was reading what appeared to be a financial newspaper while Rosa bustled around him, clearly in her element. "Good morning," Dante said, looking up as she entered. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in months," Isabella admitted, and it was true. Despite everything that had happened, despite being in a strange place with people she barely knew, she'd slept more deeply than she had since leaving Tyler. There was something about the security of this place, the sense of being truly protected, that had allowed her body to finally relax. Rosa beamed at her and immediately began preparing a plate. "You sit, Cara," she said, guiding Isabella to the breakfast bar. "You're too thin. We fix this, yes?" The plate Rosa set in front of her was loaded with eggs, fresh fruit, what looked like homemade bread, and several things she didn't recognize, but that smelled incredible. It was more food than she usually ate in an entire day, but Rosa stood watching with such hopeful expectation that Isabella didn't have the heart to protest. Dante folded his newspaper and gave her his full attention. "We need to discuss some things," he said gently. "About Tyler, about what happens next." Isabella's stomach clenched, though whether from nerves or the rich food, she couldn't tell. "What kind of things?" "First, I want you to understand exactly what my family does," Dante said. "You deserve to know what you're accepting help from." Rosa made a small sound of disapproval and muttered something in rapid Italian that made Dante smile slightly. "She thinks I'm going to scare you away," he explained. "But I believe in honesty, especially when someone's safety is at stake." Isabella set down her fork, suddenly unable to eat despite Rosa's encouraging presence. "I already know you're not just a businessman," she said quietly. "No, I'm not," Dante agreed. "The Castellano family has been providing security services in this city for 3 generations. We protect people who can't rely on conventional law enforcement, handle problems that the police either can't or won't address effectively. Sometimes that means working within the law, sometimes it means working around it." It was the most direct explanation she'd gotten from him, though it still left plenty of room for interpretation. Isabella found herself both grateful for his honesty and terrified by what he wasn't saying explicitly. "What does that mean for me?" she asked. "It means you're under the protection of people who take that responsibility seriously," Dante said. "It means Tyler won't be able to hurt you. Not while you're here. Not while you're under our care." The conversation was interrupted by the sharp ring of Dante's phone. He glanced at the screen, and his expression darkened immediately. "Excuse me," he said, standing and moving to the far side of the kitchen where he answered in a voice too low for Isabella to catch the words. But she could see his face, could watch the way his jaw tightened and his free hand clenched into a fist as he listened to whoever was on the other end. When he hung up and turned back to her, his expression was carefully controlled in a way that made her stomach drop. "What's wrong?" she asked, though she was afraid she already knew. "Tyler's escalating," Dante said simply. "He contacted your sister this morning." Isabella's blood turned to ice. Sophia lived in Boston, worked as a nurse at a children's hospital, had a life completely separate from the mess Isabella had made of her own. She was innocent, uninvolved, exactly the kind of person Tyler would target to get to Isabella. "What did he say to her?" Isabella whispered. "He told her that you were in danger, that you'd been taken by dangerous people who were using you for their own purposes," Dante explained, his voice gentle despite the harshness of the words. "He said he was trying to save you, but he needed her help to find you." Isabella pushed back from the breakfast bar so violently that she nearly knocked over her chair. "I have to leave," she said desperately. "I have to go to Boston. I have to warn her. This is exactly what I was afraid of. I can't let him hurt my family because of me." "Isabella," Dante said calmly, but she was already moving toward the stairs. "No, you don't understand," she said, panic making her voice sharp. "Sophia is all the family I have left. She's a good person. She doesn't deserve this. Tyler will hurt her just to get to me. I know he will." Dante caught her arm gently but firmly as she tried to push past him. "Isabella, stop. Listen to me." Something in his tone made her freeze, though every instinct was screaming at her to run, to get to Boston, to somehow protect the one person she cared about most in the world. "Your sister is safe," Dante said quietly. "I had protection put on her the moment you told me Tyler's name last night." Isabella stared at him, not sure she'd heard correctly. "What?" "I have people watching your sister," Dante repeated. "Good people, professionals who know how to stay invisible until they're needed." Tyler approached her outside the hospital where she works, but he never got close enough to touch her. "My people intervened, and he was encouraged to leave the area immediately." The relief was so intense that Isabella's knees nearly buckled. Dante guided her back to the breakfast bar, his hand steady on her arm, while Rosa clicked her tongue sympathetically and refilled Isabella's coffee cup. "How did you know where she worked?" Isabella asked weakly. "I never told you about her." "I made some calls last night after you went to bed," Dante admitted. "I needed to know who might be at risk, who Tyler might try to use against you. Your sister, your former co-workers, anyone you cared about who he might see as leverage." The scope of his reach, his ability to gather information and deploy protection across state lines overnight, hit Isabella with the full force of what she'd gotten herself into. This wasn't just a local businessman with connections. This was someone with real power, real resources, the kind of influence that crossed boundaries and ignored conventional limitations. "She's really safe?" Isabella asked. "She's really safe," Dante confirmed. "And she'll stay that way as long as necessary." Isabella buried her face in her hands, overwhelmed by a mixture of relief and guilt. She was grateful beyond words for Dante's protection, but the reality of needing it, of dragging innocent people into Tyler's obsession, made her feel sick with self-recrimination. "This is my fault," she whispered. "All of it. If I'd been stronger, if I'd left sooner, if I'd handled things differently." "No," Dante said firmly, his hand covering hers on the counter. "This is Tyler's fault. You're not responsible for his choices, his obsession, his inability to accept that you have the right to live your own life." Isabella looked up at him, surprised by the intensity in his voice. There was something personal in his anger, something that went beyond professional concern for a client. "You sound like you know what you're talking about," she said softly. Dante was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes focused on something she couldn't see. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. "I had a sister once," he said quietly. "Younger than me, sweet, trusting. She got involved with someone who seemed charming at first, romantic, devoted. By the time we realized what he really was, it was too late. She was isolated from the family, afraid to ask for help, convinced that his jealousy and control were proof of how much he loved her." Isabella felt her heart clench at the pain in his voice. "What happened to her?" "She tried to leave him," Dante said simply. "He couldn't accept that. She died in what the police called a car accident. but everyone who knew the situation understood what really happened. The words hung between them, heavy with grief and old rage. Isabella understood now why Dante had been so quick to intervene last night, why he'd immediately recognized the danger Tyler represented. This wasn't abstract for him. This was personal. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." Her name was Lucia, Dante said, and for a moment his carefully maintained control slipped, showing her a glimpse of the man behind the authority and power. She was 23. She wanted to be a teacher, loved children, made the best lasagna in the family. She deserved better than what that bastard gave her. Isabella reached out instinctively, covering his hand with hers in a gesture of comfort that felt natural despite everything. They sat in silence for a moment, connected by shared understanding of what it meant to be trapped by someone who claimed to love you. "That's why you're helping me," Isabella said finally. "Not just because you can, but because you couldn't help her." "Partly," Dante admitted, "but also because you deserve the chance she never got. The chance to be free, to build the life you want without fear." The conversation was interrupted again by Dante's phone, but this time he answered it at the counter, speaking in quick Italian, while Isabella listened to Rosa's quiet commentary about men who worked too hard and young women who didn't eat enough breakfast. When Dante hung up, his expression was satisfied in a way that made Isabella both curious and slightly nervous. "Tyler tried to approach your sister again an hour ago," he said, "this time at her apartment building. My people were waiting for him." "What does that mean?" Isabella asked. "It means Tyler has been given a very clear message about what will happen if he continues to threaten innocent people," Dante replied. "It means he now understands that this situation has escalated beyond his ability to control." The casual way he said it, the certainty in his voice, reminded Isabella once again of exactly what kind of protection she was under. She should probably be horrified by the implications, but instead she felt only relief that Sophia was safe. "Will he stop now?" she asked hopefully. Dante's expression grew thoughtful. "Men like Tyler don't stop easily," he said honestly. "But now he knows he's not just dealing with you anymore. He's dealing with people who have resources he can't match and a willingness to use them that he can't intimidate." Isabella nodded, understanding that this was as close to a guarantee of safety as she was likely to get. It would have to be enough, because the alternative was unthinkable. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For everything. For Sophia, for me, for taking this seriously when no one else would." Dante studied her face, and something in his expression shifted, becoming warmer, more personal. "You don't have to thank me, Isabella. You just have to let us keep you safe." Rosa, who had been quietly cleaning up around them, made a satisfied sound and patted Isabella's shoulder. "You eat more breakfast now, Cara," she said gently. "It's good for you to have people who care, yes? Make you strong." As Isabella picked up her fork again, she realized Rosa was right. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she wasn't facing her problems alone. It was a feeling she'd almost forgotten existed, and despite everything that had brought her here, she found herself grateful for it. Over the next few days, Isabella found herself falling into a routine that felt both foreign and surprisingly natural. She'd always been someone who needed to stay busy, to feel useful, and the luxury of Dante's penthouse would have felt overwhelming if not for Rosa's gentle guidance in finding ways to contribute. It started with small things. Helping Rosa prepare meals, learning to fold Dante's shirts the way he preferred them, organizing the extensive library that took up one entire wall of his home office. Rosa seemed delighted to have another woman in the house, chattering away in a mixture of Italian and English while they worked side by side in the kitchen. "You have good hands for pasta," Rosa declared on the third morning, watching Isabella roll out dough for homemade ravioli. "Is important, the feel for it. Cannot learn from book, only from doing." Isabella found the work soothing, the repetitive motions of kneading and rolling providing a meditative focus that kept her mind from spiraling into anxiety about Tyler or guilt about the situation she'd put Dante in. There was something healing about creating something beautiful and nourishing, about contributing to the household in a concrete way. Dante seemed to notice the change in her routine. He'd started working from home more often, conducting his business calls from the office just off the living room instead of leaving early for whatever meetings and obligations normally filled his days. Isabella wasn't sure if this was for her benefit or simply coincidence. but she found herself looking forward to the meals they shared, the conversations that had gradually moved beyond the basics of her situation to more personal territory. She learned that he'd studied business at Columbia, that he spoke 4 languages fluently, that he had a weakness for old movies and good wine. He learned that she'd wanted to be a teacher before Tyler had convinced her she wasn't smart enough, that she could speak some Spanish from her grandmother, that she read voraciously when she had access to books. The physical awareness between them grew gradually, in small moments that felt both natural and charged with significance. The way he steadied her with a hand on her waist when she reached for something in a high cabinet. The brush of his fingers against hers when he handed her a cup of coffee. The way his eyes lingered on her face when he thought she wasn't looking. Isabella found herself noticing details about him that had nothing to do with his obvious wealth or power. The way he always made sure Rosa sat down and ate with them instead of serving and retreating. The gentleness in his voice when he spoke to elderly family members on the phone. The scar on his knuckles that suggested his hands had seen violence, but that were unfailingly gentle with her. On Thursday afternoon, she met Luca Moretti, Dante's second-in-command and closest friend. He was younger than Dante, maybe early 30s, with the kind of easy smile that made it clear why people trusted him despite the obvious danger he represented. He'd stopped by to discuss business, but stayed for Rosa's lasagna and ended up regaling Isabella with embarrassing stories about Dante's youth. He was the most serious 10-year-old you've ever seen, Luca told her, gesturing with his wine glass. Even then, always taking care of everyone else, always thinking 3 steps ahead. Drove his mother crazy because he wouldn't just be a kid. Isabella could picture it easily, a small version of Dante shouldering responsibilities beyond his years. It explained the natural authority he carried, the way he seemed to automatically assume responsibility for the people around him. Some things never change, Dante said dryly, but there was affection in his voice as he looked at his friend. After Luca left, Isabella found herself studying Dante with new eyes. She was beginning to understand that his protectiveness wasn't just professional courtesy or even personal obligation based on his sister's tragedy. It was fundamental to who he was, the way he moved through the world. The comfortable bubble of safety they'd built was shattered on Friday morning when Dante's phone rang while they were having breakfast. Isabella could tell immediately from his expression that something was wrong, and when he hung up, the carefully controlled anger she'd seen that first night was back in full force. "Tyler broke into your apartment last night," Dante said quietly. Isabella's coffee cup clattered against the saucer as her hands started shaking. "What?" "He destroyed most of what you left behind," Dante continued, his voice getting softer and more dangerous with each word. "Furniture, books, clothes. He also left messages. On the walls, on the mirrors. The landlord called the police, but Tyler was long gone by the time they arrived." The violation hit Isabella like a physical blow. That tiny studio apartment hadn't been much, but it had been hers, the first place she'd felt even marginally safe after leaving Tyler. The idea of him destroying her few possessions, marking her space with his rage and obsession, made her feel sick and small all over again. "What did the messages say?" she whispered. Dante's jaw tightened. "Things that make it clear his mental state is deteriorating. He's becoming more erratic, more dangerous. This isn't going to end with him giving up and walking away." Isabella wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm kitchen and Rose's motherly presence. She'd known Tyler was persistent, had experienced his refusal to accept rejection before, but this felt different. This felt like someone who had moved beyond reason into pure obsession. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for bringing this into your life, for causing all this trouble." Dante's chair scraped against the floor as he moved it closer to hers. "Isabella, look at me," he said gently. She raised her eyes to meet his, surprised by the intensity she saw there. "You are not causing trouble," Dante said firmly. "You are a person who deserves to live without fear. What Tyler is doing isn't your fault, and you don't need to apologize for accepting help." The kindness in his voice, the certainty that she was worth protecting, broke something loose inside Isabella's chest. Before Tyler, she'd been confident, independent, sure of her own worth. Slowly, methodically, he'd stripped that away until she'd become someone who apologized for taking up space, who accepted blame for other people's actions. She'd almost forgotten what it felt like to have someone speak to her like she mattered. "Thank you," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. Dante reached out and touched her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "We're going to end this, Isabella. I promise you that." That evening, they sat together in Dante's living room after Rosa had retired for the night. Isabella was curled in one corner of the massive leather sofa with a book, while Dante worked on his laptop, occasionally taking phone calls in the rapid Italian she was beginning to find soothing rather than intimidating. The domesticity of it struck her as strange and wonderful. 6 months ago, she'd been alone in her studio apartment, jumping at every sound and sleeping with a chair against the door. Now she was reading in comfortable silence while one of the most dangerous men in the city worked quietly beside her, and she felt safer than she had in years. "Tell me something," Dante said during a break between calls. "Something about who you were before Tyler. Something he couldn't touch or change." Isabella looked up from her book, surprised by the request. "Why?" "Because I want to know her," Dante said simply. "The woman you were, the woman you're becoming again." Isabella thought for a moment, trying to reach back through years of being told she was too sensitive, too naive, not smart enough or strong enough or worthy enough. "I wanted to be a teacher," she said slowly. "Elementary school, maybe second or third grade. I used to volunteer at the library, reading to kids during story time. I loved watching their faces when they got excited about a book, when they discovered that stories could take them anywhere." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "I was good at it too. Kids trusted me, opened up to me. I could help the shy ones find their voices and redirect the troublemakers into something constructive. I thought maybe I'd go back to school, get my teaching certificate." "What stopped you?" Dante asked, though they both knew the answer. "Tyler said it was a waste of time, that I'd never be good enough to handle a classroom full of kids, that I needed to focus on more practical things. He made it seem like caring about children's books and imagination was childish, embarrassing." Dante's expression darkened. He was wrong. About all of it. Isabella felt something warm unfurl in her chest at the certainty in his voice. It was such a simple statement, but it carried the weight of absolute conviction. "How do you know?" she asked softly. "Because I've watched you with Rosa," Dante said. "You have infinite patience, genuine kindness. Because you've survived 2 years with someone who tried to destroy your spirit, and you're still capable of caring about other people. That takes strength most people never develop." The words settled into something deep inside Isabella that had been wounded and empty for too long. She looked at Dante, really looked at him, and saw not just protection and power, but genuine respect for who she was. When was the last time someone had seen her that way? Without really thinking about it, she shifted on the sofa, moving closer to him. Dante set aside his laptop and turned to face her fully, and suddenly the space between them felt charged with possibility. "Isabella," he said quietly, and there was something in his voice that made her heart race. She leaned toward him, drawn by the warmth in his dark eyes and the gentleness she'd discovered beneath his dangerous exterior. He lifted his hand to cup her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with reverent care. The moment stretched between them, full of promise and new understanding. Isabella could see in his expression that he wanted to kiss her, could feel her own desire pulling her closer to him. This wasn't gratitude or proximity or fear-seeking comfort. This was genuine attraction, real connection, the beginning of something that felt precious and important. Dante's phone rang, shattering the moment like glass. He closed his eyes briefly, his hand still on her face, and Isabella could see the internal struggle between duty and desire. The phone continued ringing, insistent and demanding. "I'm sorry," Dante said softly, and she could hear real regret in his voice. "I have to take this." Isabella nodded, understanding but disappointed. She watched him answer the phone and immediately switch into the focused, authoritative persona she recognized from their first meeting. "Tyler's at the restaurant," Dante said after a brief conversation. "He's harassing the staff, trying to get information about you." Isabella's stomach dropped. The people at Nana's had been kind to her, had given her a job when she desperately needed one. The idea of Tyler bringing his obsession there, making them uncomfortable or afraid, filled her with guilt and anger. "I should go," she said, starting to rise from the sofa. "I should quit, make sure he doesn't bother them anymore." "No," Dante said firmly, his hand on her arm stopping her movement. "You don't run from this anymore, Isabella. We handle it properly this time." There was something in his voice that reminded her of the man who had faced down Tyler that first night, cold and certain and absolutely uncompromising. She realized that whatever had been building between them personally, it hadn't changed his commitment to protecting her. If anything, it had made him more determined. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means Tyler's about to learn that his behavior has consequences he can't escape," Dante said, already reaching for his jacket. "And it means you're going to be free to live your life without looking over your shoulder." As he prepared to leave, Isabella felt a complex mixture of relief, fear, and something that might have been love settling in her chest. She was beginning to understand that accepting Dante's protection had changed her in ways that went far beyond safety. It had reminded her who she could be when she wasn't afraid, who she was when someone saw her clearly and chose to stand beside her anyway. The feelings growing between them weren't just about gratitude or proximity or the intensity of their situation. They were about recognition. Two people who understood each other's wounds and chose to protect what was precious in each other. Whatever happened with Tyler, whatever came next, Isabella knew her life had been fundamentally altered by the man who had stepped between her and danger without asking for anything in return except the chance to keep her safe. Isabella returned to work at Nana's the following Tuesday, though under very different circumstances than when she'd left. Dante had insisted on discreet security, and while she couldn't see the protection, she could feel it in the way certain customers lingered longer than usual at their tables, in the subtle way conversations quieted when she passed. It should have made her nervous, but instead she felt liberated for the first time since Tyler had found her again. Mrs. Benedetto, the restaurant owner, had welcomed her back with tears in her eyes and refused to hear any apologies for the trouble Tyler had caused. "You are family here, Cara," she'd said firmly. "Family protects family. Anyone who bothers our Isabella answers to all of us." The work felt good, familiar motions that grounded her in normalcy, while everything else in her life shifted into new territory. She found herself humming while she cleared tables, chatting easily with customers who'd missed her during her absence, settling back into the rhythm of service that had always soothed her. But beneath the surface, she was acutely aware that this was borrowed time, that Tyler was still out there somewhere, planning his next move. That evening, she and Dante cooked dinner together in the comfortable silence that had become their routine. She was learning his preferences, the way he liked his pasta just slightly underdone, how he moved efficiently around the kitchen with the same focus he brought to everything else. There was something deeply intimate about sharing the preparation of a meal, about the small touches and quiet coordination that felt like a dance they'd been practicing for years instead of days. "You're good at this," Dante said, watching her dice vegetables with the precision Rosa had taught her. "Rosa's a good teacher," Isabella replied, but she could feel the weight of his attention, the way his eyes followed her movements with appreciation that had nothing to do with cooking technique. "I wasn't talking about cooking," Dante said quietly. Isabella looked up, meeting his gaze across the marble island. The kitchen felt suddenly smaller, charged with the awareness that had been building between them for days. She could see the desire in his dark eyes, but also something deeper, more complex. Respect. Admiration. Something that looked remarkably like love. "What were you talking about then?" she asked softly. "Everything," Dante said, moving around the island until he was standing close enough that she could smell his cologne, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "The way you've handled all of this. Your strength. Your grace. The way you make everything feel more alive just by being here." Isabella's breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her like that, with such quiet reverence, as if she were something precious and rare, instead of someone who'd brought nothing but trouble into his ordered world. Dante reached out and touched her face, the same gentle gesture from the night before, but this time there was no phone to interrupt them. This time, when he leaned down and kissed her, there was nothing to stop Isabella from melting into the warmth of his embrace. The kiss was everything she'd imagined and more. Gentle at first, questioning, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. But Isabella didn't want to pull away. She wanted to sink into the safety and strength of his arms, wanted to lose herself in the careful tenderness of his touch. When she kissed him back, really kissed him, she felt Dante's control slip just slightly, felt him pull her closer with something approaching desperation. When they finally broke apart, Isabella was breathing hard, her heart racing with a combination of desire and something deeper, more frightening. The realization that what she felt for Dante wasn't just gratitude or proximity or the intensity of their circumstances. It was real, and it was changing everything. "I need you to know something," Isabella said, her hands resting on his chest where she could feel his heart beating as fast as her own. "What?" Dante asked, his voice rough with the effort of maintaining control. "I'm not staying because I'm afraid to leave," Isabella said, the words coming in a rush. "I'm not here just because you're protecting me or because I have nowhere else to go. I'm staying because I want to be here. With you. Because I think I'm falling in love with you. And that terrifies me more than Tyler ever could." Dante's expression shifted, surprise giving way to something so tender it made Isabella's chest ache. "Isabella," he said, and her name sounded different in his voice, like something precious and beloved. "You don't know how long I've been waiting to hear you say that." Before she could ask what he meant, Dante's phone rang with the sharp, urgent tone he'd programmed for emergencies. They both froze, the beautiful moment shattering as reality crashed back in. Dante answered on the second ring, his expression darkening as he listened. Isabella watched his face change, saw the cold fury return as he processed whatever information he was receiving. "When?" he asked sharply. "How long ago?" "Fine. Nobody moves until I get there." He hung up and looked at Isabella with an expression that made her stomach drop. "Tyler has Rosa," he said simply. The words hit Isabella like ice water. Sweet, kind Rosa who'd welcomed her without question, who'd fussed over her eating and taught her to make pasta and treated her like the daughter she'd never had. Rosa who was innocent in all of this, who was only in danger because Isabella had brought Tyler's obsession into their peaceful home. "What?" Isabella whispered, though she'd heard him clearly. "He grabbed her when she went out to buy groceries this afternoon," Dante explained, his voice terrifyingly calm. "My security detail lost them in traffic, but we think we know where he's taken her." Isabella felt like she was going to be sick. This was her worst nightmare realized, an innocent person hurt because of her, because she'd been too weak to handle Tyler herself, too scared to face him alone. "I have to go," she said desperately. "I have to give myself up, trade myself for her. This is my fault. Rosa doesn't deserve this." "No," Dante said firmly, gripping her shoulders. "You're not trading yourself for anyone. We're going to get Rosa back safely, and we're going to end this tonight." The certainty in his voice, the absolute conviction that he could fix this, should have been reassuring. Instead, Isabella found herself more frightened than ever, not for herself, but for what Dante might have to do to keep his promise. "I'm coming with you," Isabella said. "Absolutely not," Dante replied immediately. "You're staying here where you're safe." "No," Isabella said, and there was steel in her voice that surprised them both. "I'm done hiding while other people get hurt because of me. Rosa is in danger because Tyler is trying to get to me. I need to be there." Dante started to argue, but something in Isabella's expression stopped him. Perhaps he recognized that she'd reached the same conclusion he had months ago when he'd decided to stop being a victim of circumstance and start taking control of his own life. "You don't leave my side," Dante said finally. "Not for a second. And if I tell you to run, you run. No questions, no arguments." Isabella nodded, though she knew she'd never be able to leave Rosa behind, whatever Dante said. They arrived at an abandoned warehouse in Queens 40 minutes later. Isabella could see why Tyler had chosen it, isolated and dark with plenty of places to hide or set traps. Dante's men were already positioned around the perimeter, shadows moving with deadly purpose through the industrial landscape. "He wants to negotiate," Luca reported quietly as they approached the main entrance. "Says he'll trade the old woman for Isabella and a guarantee of safe passage out of the state." "And what did you tell him?" Dante asked. "That we'd consider it," Luca replied with a grim smile. "Figured you'd want to hear his terms in person." Isabella's hands were shaking as they approached the warehouse, but not with fear. She was angry, angrier than she'd ever been in her life. Tyler had crossed every possible line, had hurt someone who'd never done anything but show Isabella kindness. The rage burning in her chest was clean and bright and stronger than any fear she'd ever felt. The warehouse door was slightly ajar, spilling yellow light into the darkness. Isabella could hear voices inside, Tyler's familiar tone pitched higher than usual with stress and adrenaline. "Remember," Dante said quietly, his hand on her arm. "Let me do the talking. Don't let him provoke you into doing anything stupid." Isabella nodded, but she could feel something shifting inside her, some fundamental change in the way she saw herself and the situation. She wasn't the same terrified woman who'd frozen at table 12 a week ago. She'd found her courage, and more importantly, she'd found someone worth being brave for. Tyler was standing in the center of the warehouse space. Rosa sitting in a chair beside him with her hands tied, but otherwise apparently unharmed. He looked terrible, unshaven and wildeed, his clothes rumpled like he'd been sleeping in them. When he saw Isabella, his face lit up with the same obsessive joy she remembered from their worst fights. "There she is," Tyler said, his voice carrying clearly in the empty space. "My beautiful Izzy, I knew you'd come for the old woman. You always were too soft-hearted for your own good." "Let Rosa go, Tyler," Isabella said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "This is between us. She's innocent." "Innocent?" Tyler laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "She's been helping them keep you prisoner, Izzy. Cooking for you, making you comfortable so you wouldn't want to leave. She's as guilty as the rest of them." The twisted logic was so typically Tyler that Isabella almost laughed. In his mind, anyone who showed her kindness was automatically an enemy. Anyone who made her feel safe was preventing him from getting what he wanted. "I'm not a prisoner, Tyler," Isabella said clearly. "I chose to stay with Dante. I chose to leave you. Those were my decisions, my choices." Tyler's expression darkened, the familiar flash of rage she'd learned to fear. "You don't know what you're saying, Izzy. They've brainwashed you, filled your head with lies about me. But I forgive you. Come here now, and we can pretend this whole thing never happened." It was the same script he'd always used, dismissing her feelings and choices as invalid, infantilizing her capacity to make decisions about her own life. But instead of the fear and self-doubt those words used to provoke, Isabella felt only clarity. "No, Tyler," she said firmly. "I know exactly what I'm saying. I left you because you hurt me, because you controlled me, because you made me afraid to exist in my own life. I stayed away because I deserved better than what you gave me. And I fell in love with Dante because he sees me as a person worth protecting instead of property to be owned." Tyler's face went white with rage, and Isabella saw him look around wildly, as if just now realizing how outnumbered and outgunned he was. But instead of backing down, his obsession seemed to crystallize into something even more dangerous. "You think he loves you?" Tyler snarled. "You think you matter to him? You're nothing, Izzy. You're weak and stupid and worthless, and once he gets tired of playing hero, he'll throw you away like garbage." The words should have heard, would have destroyed her just weeks ago. Instead, Isabella felt only pity for the man who'd convinced himself that love was possession and that breaking someone's spirit was a form of devotion. "You're wrong," Isabella said quietly. "About all of it. And you know what the saddest part is, Tyler? If you'd ever actually loved me, you would have wanted me to be happy. You would have let me go when I asked you to. But you never loved me. You just loved controlling me." Something snapped in Tyler's expression, and he lunged toward Rosa with sudden violence. But Dante was already moving, crossing the space between them with lethal efficiency. The confrontation was brief and decisive, Tyler's desperation no match for Dante's training and cold determination. When it was over, Tyler lay still on the concrete floor, and Isabella felt nothing but relief that the nightmare was finally, permanently over. Rosa was unharmed, tearful but safe in Isabella's embrace, while Dante's men efficiently handled the cleanup with the kind of professional competence that suggested this wasn't their first such situation. "It's done," Dante said quietly, pulling Isabella into his arms while Rosa clung to them both. "You're free, really free this time." Isabella buried her face in Dante's chest, overwhelmed by relief and gratitude and love so intense it took her breath away. When she looked up at him, she saw her own feelings reflected in his dark eyes. "I love you," she said, the words coming easily now that there was nothing left to fear. "I love you, and I want to stay. Not because I need protection, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it." Dante's kiss was his answer, tender and fierce and full of promise. Around them, his men worked quietly, while Rosa alternated between scolding them for taking such risks and crying with relief that everyone was safe. Later that night, Back at the penthouse with Rosa settled comfortably in her own room and the crisis finally, truly over, Isabella found herself in Dante's bedroom for the first time. The space was elegant and masculine, all dark wood and rich fabrics. But what struck her most was how it reflected the man she'd come to know. Controlled but warm, powerful but not ostentatious. A sanctuary rather than a display. "Are you sure?" Dante asked softly, his hands gentle on her face as they stood beside his bed. Isabella looked into his eyes and saw only love and patience and the promise of a future she'd never dared to imagine. She was sure about him, about them, about the life they could build together now that the shadows of her past had been permanently banished. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she whispered. When Dante made love to her, it was with the same careful reverence he'd shown from the beginning, as if she were something precious and irreplaceable. Isabella had never felt so cherished, so completely seen and accepted for who she was. In his arms, she rediscovered not just passion but joy, not just desire but the deep contentment of being exactly where she belonged. Afterward, lying in the circle of his arms while he traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, Isabella realized that Tyler's obsession had inadvertently given her the greatest gift of her life. Without the danger he represented, she would never have met Dante, never would have discovered what real love could feel like. "I want forever," Dante said quietly into the darkness. "I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life." Isabella turned in his arms, studying his face in the dim light filtering through the windows. "Forever," she repeated, testing how the word felt. She'd stopped believing in forever during her time with Tyler, had learned to think only in terms of surviving one day at a time. But with Dante, forever felt not just possible, but inevitable. "Forever sounds perfect," she said, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted like new beginnings and happily ever after. The immediate aftermath of Tyler's death was surprisingly mundane. There were police reports to file, though Dante's lawyers handled most of the paperwork with the kind of efficiency that suggested they'd done this before. The official story was simple enough. Tyler Brennan had kidnapped an elderly woman and died during the rescue attempt. Self-defense, clear-cut, no charges filed. Isabella found herself strangely numb to the legal proceedings. She'd expected to feel something more dramatic about Tyler's death, guilt or relief or closure, but mostly she felt empty. The man who had dominated her thoughts and fears for so long was simply gone, leaving behind nothing but bad memories that seemed to lose their power more with each passing hour. It wasn't until 3 days later, when she woke up in Dante's bed without that familiar knot of anxiety in her stomach, that the reality truly hit her. She was free, not just physically safe, but mentally and emotionally liberated from the constant hypervigilance that had defined her existence for so long. For the first time in over 2 years, she could think about the future without fear. The morning sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows felt different somehow, warmer and more welcoming. Isabella stretched luxuriously, enjoying the simple pleasure of waking up slowly instead of jolting awake at the first sound. Beside her, Dante was still sleeping, his face relaxed in a way she rarely saw during his waking hours. He looked younger like this, less like the dangerous man who commanded respect throughout the city, and more like someone who deserved the peaceful happiness she was determined to give him. Rosa was back to her normal routine as if nothing had happened, though Isabella noticed she accepted the additional security Dante had insisted upon without her usual protests about too much fussing. Over breakfast, she regaled them with stories about her late husband's family, which had apparently included several colorful characters who made Dante's business associates look tame by comparison. "You think the Castellano family is dramatic," Rosa said, waving her coffee cup for emphasis. "You should have met my Giuseppe's cousin Salvatore. That man could start an argument in an empty room and somehow convince 3 people to take sides." Isabella found herself laughing more easily than she had in years. The simple joy of being surrounded by people who cared about her settling into something warm and permanent in her chest. This was what family felt like, she realized. Not the biological accident of shared genetics, but the deliberate choice to care for each other, to create safety and warmth and belonging together. A week after Tyler's death, Dante took her to meet his mother. Elena Castellano was a small, elegant woman in her early 70s who welcomed Isabella with the kind of maternal warmth that made it clear where Dante had learned his protective instincts. Her home was filled with photographs spanning 3 generations of Castellano family history, and she spent the afternoon sharing stories that painted a picture of a family that had weathered tragedy and triumph with equal grace. "Dante tells me you want to be a teacher," Elena said as they sat in her garden. Surrounded by the roses she tended with obvious devotion. "It's important work, shaping young minds." Lucia wanted to teach as well. Isabella felt honored to be compared to Dante's beloved sister, and she could see in Elena's eyes that the older woman understood exactly what Isabella represented to her son. Not just a romantic partner, but the hope of healing old wounds and building new happiness from the ashes of past loss. Over dinner that evening, Dante was quieter than usual, lost in thought in a way that made Isabella wonder what his conversation with his mother had stirred up. It wasn't until they were back at the penthouse, sitting together on the terrace overlooking the city lights, that he finally spoke what was on his mind. "I never thought I'd want this," Dante said quietly, his arm around Isabella as she curled against his side. "After Lucia died, I convinced myself that caring too much about someone was a weakness I couldn't afford. But being with you has changed everything." Isabella tilted her head to look at him, seeing vulnerability in his expression that few people ever witnessed. "How so?" "You make me want to be more than just the man who handles problems," Dante said. "You make me want to be the man who builds something beautiful, something lasting. You make me want to be worthy of the love I see in your eyes." Before Isabella could respond, Dante shifted beside her, and suddenly he was on one knee, a small velvet box in his hands that seemed to have appeared from nowhere. Isabella's breath caught, her heart racing as the reality of the moment crashed over her. "Isabella Romano," Dante said, his voice steady despite the emotion she could see in his dark eyes. "You've made me believe and hope again. You've shown me what courage really looks like, and you've given me a reason to want forever. Will you marry me?" The ring was perfect, an elegant solitaire that caught the city lights and threw them back in brilliant sparks. But what moved Isabella most was the expression on Dante's face, the careful hope and deep love that made her feel like the most precious thing in his world. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, her voice strong and certain. "Yes, absolutely yes." When Dante slipped the ring onto her finger, Isabella felt something click into place, a sense of rightness and belonging that went deeper than romance or passion. This was partnership, the promise of building a life together based on mutual respect and unwavering devotion. Their engagement brought Isabella more fully into Dante's world, introducing her to the extended network of family and associates who comprised his business empire. She met his cousins and their wives, learned the intricate dynamics of relationships that stretched back generations, began to understand her place in the complex hierarchy of loyalty and respect that governed their world. To her surprise, she found that she not only fit into this world but thrived in it. The same intuition that had made her good with children served her well in reading the subtle social cues that determined how business was conducted. The organizational skills she developed in her various service jobs translated perfectly to helping coordinate the legitimate aspects of the family's enterprises. More importantly, the respect Dante showed her was reflected back by everyone they met. She wasn't treated as arm candy or a temporary distraction, but as Dante's chosen partner, someone whose opinions mattered and whose presence was valued. It was a level of regard she'd never experienced before, and it helped her confidence bloom in ways that surprised even her. Isabella returned to work at Nana's, but now her shifts felt like a choice rather than a necessity. She worked because she enjoyed it, because the restaurant had become genuinely important to her, not because she desperately needed the income to survive. Mrs. Benedetto had been delighted by the engagement news, immediately beginning to plan what she declared would be the most beautiful wedding reception Little Italy had ever seen. The change in Isabella's confidence was visible to everyone who knew her. She carried herself differently, spoke up more readily, no longer apologized for taking up space or having opinions. The constant hypervigilance that had defined her existence for so long was gone, replaced by the comfortable certainty that she was safe, valued, and loved. 3 months after the engagement, they held a party at Elena's house to celebrate officially. Isabella's sister Sophia made the trip from Boston, and Isabella watched nervously as the two most important women in her life met for the first time. Her fears proved groundless. Sophia and Elena bonded immediately over shared stories of trying to take care of stubborn, overprotective family members. "I've never seen you like this," Sophia said as she and Isabella walked through Elena's garden after dinner. "You're glowing, Bella. You look like yourself again, but better, stronger." Isabella thought about the woman she'd been before Tyler, confident but naive, independent but sometimes lonely. She thought about the woman she'd become during those dark 2 years, small and afraid and constantly apologizing for existing. Now she felt like a synthesis of both, taking the best parts of who she'd been and combining them with the wisdom and strength that came from surviving and thriving despite everything Tyler had tried to do to her. "I feel like myself again," Isabella agreed. "But you're right, it's different now. Better. I know what I'm capable of surviving, and I know what real love feels like. That changes everything." The wedding planning was a joyful chaos that involved 3 generations of Castellano women and took on a scope that would have terrified Isabella 6 months ago. Now she found herself calmly coordinating vendors and managing guest lists with the same efficiency she'd once brought to managing difficult customers during dinner rushes. The skills were remarkably transferable, and she discovered she was good at bringing order to complex situations. Dante marveled at her transformation, watching her navigate family politics and vendor negotiations with grace and authority that seemed to come naturally to her. "You're amazing," he told her one evening after she'd successfully mediated a dispute between his cousin's wife and the florist. "I think my family likes you better than they like me." "They should," Isabella replied with a grin. "I'm much easier to get along with." The wedding itself was perfect, an elegant affair that managed to be both intimate and grand. Isabella wore her grandmother's pearls and a dress that made her feel like a princess, but what she remembered most was the look in Dante's eyes when she walked down the aisle. Pure love and promise and gratitude that made her feel like the luckiest woman alive. Their honeymoon in Sicily was a revelation. 2 weeks of being completely alone together without the outside pressures of business or family or the lingering shadows of the past. They explored ancient cities and ate incredible food, and made love with the lazy passion of people who had all the time in the world to discover each other. It was during those golden weeks that Isabella truly understood what forever meant. Not just the promise to stay together, but the daily choice to build something beautiful and lasting, to choose each other again and again through whatever life might bring. 6 months after the wedding, Isabella stood in the bathroom of their penthouse staring at a pregnancy test with shaking hands. They hadn't been trying exactly, but they hadn't been preventing anything either, both of them secure enough in their relationship to welcome whatever happened naturally. When Dante found her there, frozen with shock and joy and a little bit of fear, he didn't need to see the test to understand what was happening. The expression on her face told him everything he needed to know. "Really?" he asked softly, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Really," Isabella confirmed, leaning into his embrace as he pulled her close. They held each other in the bathroom doorway, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what lay ahead. This baby would be the ultimate symbol of their love, proof that beautiful things could grow from the ashes of trauma and loss. Rosa cried when they told her, immediately launching into plans for converting one of the guest rooms into a nursery and announcing that she would teach their child to make proper Italian food, whether they liked it or not. Elena was equally emotional, seeing in their news the promise of healing for wounds that had never quite stopped bleeding. Isabella's pregnancy was smooth and peaceful, surrounded by love and support in a way that made her feel incredibly blessed. She continued working at the restaurant until her 7th month, when her growing belly made navigating between tables more challenging than it was worth. Mrs. Benedetto threw her a baby shower that involved half of Little Italy and enough food to feed a small army. During those quiet months of waiting, Isabella often reflected on the journey that had brought her to this place. The terrified woman who'd frozen at table 12 seemed like someone from another lifetime, though she could still remember the fear and desperation that had once consumed her daily existence. Sometimes she wondered what would have happened if Tyler had never found her at the restaurant, if she'd managed to disappear successfully and start over somewhere else. She might have eventually built a reasonably happy life, but it would never have been this life, would never have led her to Dante and the family they were creating together. In the strangest way, Tyler's obsession had inadvertently given her everything she'd ever wanted. Not that she was grateful to him, but she could appreciate the twisted irony that his determination to control her had ultimately led to her complete liberation. Their daughter was born on a sunny Tuesday in March, 8 pounds of perfect health and obvious Castellano features. Isabella held her for the first time and felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. This tiny person was theirs, a living symbol of the love that had transformed both their lives. They named her Lucia Rosa, honoring both the sister Dante had lost and the woman who had become family to them both. When Rosa held her namesake for the first time, she cried with joy and immediately began speaking to the baby in rapid Italian that sounded like the most beautiful lullaby Isabella had ever heard. Dante was a natural father, patient and gentle and completely besotted with his daughter. Isabella often found him standing by her crib in the middle of the night, not because Lucia was crying, but simply because he couldn't quite believe she was real. The sight of this powerful, dangerous man reduced to complete tenderness by 8 pounds of baby never failed to make Isabella fall in love with him all over again. When Lucia was 3 months old, they decided to celebrate by having dinner at Nana's, the place where their story had truly begun. Mrs. Benedetto had been waiting for this moment, clearing their favorite corner table and preparing a meal that was more homecoming celebration than simple dinner. As they sat at table 15, the same table where Dante had first offered his protection all those months ago, Isabella looked around the restaurant with deep satisfaction. This place represented so much more than where she'd worked. It was where she'd been saved, where she'd first glimpsed the possibility of a different kind of life. "Do you ever regret it?" Dante asked softly, following her gaze around the familiar dining room. "Accepting help from a stranger, getting involved with someone like me?" Isabella looked at him across the table. This man who'd stepped between her and danger without hesitation, who'd shown her what real love looked like, who'd given her safety and partnership and now the beautiful family they were building together. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single second. You saved my life, Dante. Not just from Tyler, but from the small, fearful existence I thought was all I deserved. You showed me I was worth protecting, worth loving, worth building a future with." She reached across the table to take his hand, their wedding rings catching the soft restaurant lighting. "I know some people might look at our story and think it's too dramatic, too dangerous, too much like something from a movie. But you know what I think?" "What?" Dante asked, his thumb stroking gently across her knuckles. "I think everyone deserves to have someone who would move heaven and earth to keep them safe," Isabella said. "Everyone deserves to feel like they're worth fighting for. Maybe not everyone gets a story as dramatic as ours, but everyone deserves to know what it feels like to be truly, completely loved." She paused, looking around the restaurant again, then back at her husband and their sleeping daughter. "And I want to know something from all of you watching our story. Have you ever experienced that kind of love? The kind that changes everything, that makes you believe in forever? I hope you have, and if you haven't yet, I hope you will. Because once you know what real love feels like, you realize that everything else is just settling for less than you deserve." Dante smiled at her, the same soft expression she'd fallen in love with, and Isabella felt that familiar flutter of joy and gratitude for the extraordinary life they'd built together. From the ashes of fear and trauma had grown something beautiful and lasting, proof that sometimes the most unexpected circumstances could lead to the greatest happiness. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, baby Lucia stirring sleepily in her carrier, Isabella took one last look around the place where her new life had begun. She thought about the scared, isolated woman who'd served tables here just over a year ago, and felt proud of how far she'd come. The future stretched ahead of them, full of promise and possibility. There would be challenges, of course, the normal complications of marriage and parenthood and building a life together. But Isabella faced that future without fear, secure in the knowledge that whatever came next, they would handle it together. Sometimes salvation came in the most unexpected forms, she reflected as they walked out into the Little Italy evening. Sometimes it took someone dangerous to make you feel truly safe, someone powerful to help you find your own strength, someone who understood darkness to help you appreciate the light. Their story had begun with fear and threat and desperation, but it had become something beautiful, a testament to the transformative power of real love and the strength that could be found in choosing to trust, choosing to hope, choosing to build something lasting with someone who saw you as worth protecting. As they walked home through the familiar streets, their daughter safe in her father's arms and their love stronger than ever, Isabella smiled at the perfect rightness of their life together. This was what happily ever after really looked like, not an ending but a beginning, the start of whatever beautiful chapter would come next in the story they were writing together. The future was theirs, bright with promise and built on a foundation of love strong enough to weather any storm. And Isabella had never been more grateful for the twist of fate that had brought Tyler Brennan into Nana's restaurant on that terrifying night that had ultimately led her home.